started.
Okay, great.
Cool.
Perfect. Amazing. Now
Make
you
you
could
host
hand
back.
me the host back, and I'm going to put this on. Go live with this. Let's go.
Cool.
Cool. Go live.
Okay, so I think we'll wait like a few minutes so the room will fill up.
Perfect. And we're also live on Facebook now, so it's going to be broadcasted there as well.
Great, great.
Amazing. Okay. It's great to see some attendees here. We've got Nelly, Noah, Svi, and we're about to have a lot more.
Hey, everyone.
It is 1 minute to 8. We're going to give this a few minutes, wait for some people to join before we begin with the introductions. In the meantime, whoever is here and tuned in, hello, Tzvi. Thank you for saying hello. We'd love for you to say, introduce yourself. What's your name? I mean, we see your name, where you're from, and which company you work at. Just to start with an introduction from your side as you come in, so we get to know each other. I'll start. I'm Panina from Scale Ops. Oh, I wrote that to all the panelists. Channing from HubSpot in Boston. Amazing. Right, that's right. I said I'll say where I'm from also. In Israel. Rose, you could throw in where you're from too, okay? And oh, Tel Aviv, Israel. Thank you, Tzvi. Amazing. From Hexa 3D. Also, when you're sending the comment, make sure you're sending it to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see, and not just us, because we're, saying hello to everyone here. Hello, Lena from AnyVision Israel. AnyVision. Sorry if I'm pronouncing anyone's name or company wrong. Noah from PractiTest, Tel Aviv. Thanks for joining us.
I realized I submitted mine earlier, but I didn't go to everyone, so I put mine through.
Yeah, I also realized I did that earlier. Thank you, Channing. Again, Channing Ferrer from HubSpot in Boston, US. Maya, 20 minutes from Tel Aviv. Wow, we're really, Maya, Okay, 20 minutes from Tel Aviv. That's central enough. You know, you have to say the area you're from when you're not in the big city, but next to it. That's great. Nelly from Scale Ops. Woo, Scale Ops. I mean, woo, everyone, but like, you know, I'm biased. From Afula, Israel. Hi, Ayala. Thanks for the hi. From Cadence Design Systems in Tel Aviv. Love this. We're at 21 attendees now. We're going to give it another minute or two. Yuval from Orabi, Tel Aviv. Great. I love that arm. Gabriel from Vancouver, Canada. Woo, we're have a few from across the ocean. Okay, Go for delivers. Nice, nice. Hadass from Exceed.ai, Tel Aviv. Amazing, amazing. So I like this mix of different startups in Tel Aviv. And Anna from Scale Ops. I'm joking. Again, I'm not biased, but you know, I have to have some from Be'er Yaakov. It's on the map. I don't believe it's on the map, but okay. You could say an hour from Tel Aviv, maybe. I see that Maya is raising her hand. I'm going to, was that an accident? I could allow you to talk, Maya, if you would like. Oh, that was a typo. No problem. And Shay from Madrid. Okay, so, you know, we're not just Israel here. That's great. We've got Vancouver, we've got Boston, we've got Madrid. I'm going to stop taking the straight up. Ariella, would you like to speak for a moment before we begin? I'm going to allow you to speak for a second.
Oh, hi. I hope
Hi.
everyone can hear me. My name is Ariella Povodovsky. I'm from Israel. I didn't hear the beginning of your introduction, so maybe I missed something. But I just saw this webinar on Facebook, and I thought, why not?
Okay.
Sounds very
Thank you.
interesting.
Thank you, Ariella. That was great. We actually did not begin to introduce ourselves, and we'll have a chance for everyone to speak later. So I just want to begin to introduce ourselves, as we've heard from all of you for now. And thanks everyone for sharing. It was really awesome and really helpful, just so we get to know from you who you are. Now, from our side, I want to first say thank you so much for joining us here tonight. My name is Panina Stauber. I'm the marketing director here at Scale Ops, and I will be mediating this webinar this evening. And I would love to introduce you to our host and speakers, Rose Pinchasi and Channing Ferrer. Rose, please take it away.
Okay, so hey everyone, thank you for joining. I'm Rose, CEO at ScaleOps. We are a revenue operations consulting firm. We work closely with HubSpot as their partners, focusing mostly on the lead to cash funnel and revenue flow, combining with HubSpot hybrid solutions of marketing, sales, and service. And today, as you can see, I'm super excited to have here our RevOps expert, the VP Sales Operations and Strategy at HubSpot, Channing Ferrer, who is going to give us some insights regarding the fundamentals of optimizing revenue operations to scale startups and grow the revenues. So I actually followed Channing's content for a couple of months already, and I decided we must bring this knowledge to the Israeli tech industry. So super excited about that. And I think, please, Channing, the stage is yours.
Great. Well, thanks, Rose, and the team at Scale Ops. I'm excited to chat a bit about a couple topics, and we'll see. Hopefully, y'all can take a little bit away from this that's helpful and bring it back to your business. So, as the title says, we're talking a little about mess to scale, and there's a lot of different, I think, elements in how to think about this. And as Rose and I were talking through it, we said, let's focus in on the fundamentals. And I really do think the fundamentals are going to be the key here to how you build and develop a RevOps function, but as well as how you think about your overall kind of go-to-market strategy and develop your go-to-market team and engine. So I've got a few slides. We'll walk through those to get started. And then I think, Rose, we have some questions we'll dig in on. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Perfect. Let me go ahead and share my screen. and I'll get us started. Okay, so as we said, the fundamentals. So I think there's really 5 key fundamentals here when I think about how to develop the operational function as well as the overall kind of go-to-market function and kind of build that for scale. And we'll talk a little about ops per strategy. I think that's one of the keys. Change management, alignment, importance around alignment, data strategy, and KPIs, and really implementing all of these fundamentals. So these are concepts that aren't necessarily you need to do at 1 million or sub 1 million in revenue. These are fundamental concepts that carry on throughout the course of growth and scale. And that's why when I call them the fundamentals, there's not a certain stage of development where you need to be thinking about these. These are things that you should be thinking about all the time. I think about these things all the time. And we're over $1 billion in revenue, and that's something, again, all of these 5 things are things that we spend a lot of time talking about, thinking about, as well as I think, again, that $1 million, sub $1 million even in terms of revenue business. So that's why, again, fundamentals are irregardless of stage, they apply all the time. So we'll talk a little bit about how to use them depending on your stage as well as we get into this. Let me start a little bit with my org and what I do. And so I run, we call it ops and strategy. It's a bunch of different things that kind of sit within this. So I've really 4 different teams here. We have an ops team, a strategy team, a sales acceleration team, which I'll explain, and then enablement. And ops and strategy are 2 different teams, but they really attack similar problems just through slightly different lenses. They're thinking a lot about hindsight, what worked, what didn't work, insight, why did that work or not work, and foresight, what's gonna work in the future. So those are the 3 cores for ops and strategy. And we talk a lot about how do we ensure we're spending time in each one of those buckets. And by the way, the hardest bucket for them to spend time in is the foresight bucket. And that's really where ops can add a lot of value, though, is what's gonna happen in the future? How can we get more predictable going forward? Ops does this through the lens of, we've got business guardrails. We need to operate within those guardrails. Those are going to be compensation related, financial related guardrails. They kind of manage the overall business that way. Strategy helps us think what's working dependent on different ways we're selling, different ways we're going to market, different ways even we're supporting our customer base. So that's what ops, and the difference between ops and strategy. Ops builds the guardrails. Strategy helps us leverage those guardrails to drive growth in different ways going forward. Sales acceleration builds off of that. So sales acceleration says, how do we actually accelerate our selling? We talked a lot about it as non-linear growth. And linear growth is kind of your expenses. I'll do the nice visual here. Expenses and revenue are growing kind of the same, right in line, very linear lines. Non-linear growth is when you're able to really just accelerate the growth of the revenue, the top line growth. So your expenses are still maybe staying the same, but your revenue is accelerating. So sales acceleration builds off a strategy, and we build up our strategy, and then we essentially implement it through things like sales specialists or pre-sales, solution engineering. ISCs is this inbound team we have. BDR is, of course, a little more outbound oriented. So those are the groups that, again, drive or build off of strategy and help us to grow faster. And then finally, enablement also really builds off of strategy. As we develop our strategy, we need to enable our reps, enable our teams based on what that strategy is. So that's how this kind of all kind of fits together. And when I think of RevOps, I think all of these components are actually really critical to developing a functioning RevOps organization. So building off of that, let's dive into the fundamentals. And ops burst strategy is the first one. So as I have 2 different teams here, we've got a relatively large organization that we're supporting, but they don't necessarily need to be big different teams. They could all be within the same team. But I think it's really important to identify what do you want your ops and your strategy to be, and how do you want them to operate. So let me start with a little bit of headcount. And this is a bunch of different data points that we pulled together. Alexander Group's a consulting firm. We've referenced a few different articles and data sets to get to the 1 to 20 number. Alexander Group recommends a 1 to 13 when you include enablement. The way we think about it at HubSpot is a little different than that. I think these ratios all can make sense. I mean, you kind of think of a big company that has hundreds and hundreds of salespeople. You want to have some sort of a ratio for how you build out your ops org. But really, I think the most important thing is how many different kind of sales leaders do you have? How many different go-to-market, not just sales, go-to-market leaders do you have? And you need to make sure you have some sort of strategy and ops resource associated with those go-to-market leaders. So that's why we think about it in a purely very simplistic director to ops ratio 1 to 1. whenever we think about a new director of sales, a new director of revenue in any sense, go to market, marketing, success, we want to make sure we have a ops resource aligned with that leader that helps that leader to be more successful and to get to the information that they want. The other thing we think a lot about is solve for functional needs. So functional needs means if we're going to try to tackle a new initiative, we need to put a strategy or ops resource behind that. And typically that'll be a strategy resource actually behind that initiative. So the ratios are good general guidelines, but they're not necessarily the end all be all. Really, what does the business need? And as you're growing and scaling your business, sometimes ratios are going to grow and evolve over time. So just be cautious. There's a lot of writing out there around this 1 to 20 number, and it usually ranges in the 1 to 15 to 1 to 25. I've looked at a whole bunch of different articles on this. I would really make sure you're solving for the functional needs. A simple way of thinking about is that the director ratio, but again, must make sure you've got the right resourcing in place. We'll come back to this topic in a bit as well. So going back to the ops versus strategy, as I mentioned, ops and strategy sit very closely together. Ops is focused a lot on the analysis. Ops is focused on policy and planning. And strategy gets into forecasting, strategic initiatives, but they all fit together. So as I mentioned, ops kind of aligns within guardrails. Strategy builds off of that alignment to help us grow and evolve. One of the challenges that we ran into in our business as I really thought through this was this peanut butter effect. And the peanut butter effect is when we started spreading ops too thin. We said the ops team needs to do a little bit of everything. And we pushed all of our decision-making through our centralized ops team. And this was strategic decision-making. This was guardrail-based decision-making like compensation or financial planning or other things like that. And it spread the ops team thin such that we weren't getting enough value out of the ops team. And the peanut butter effect is when you start spreading peanut butter across that piece of bread, if you spread it too thin, you kind of lose the flavor and the essence of the peanut butter. So for those who don't like peanut butter, I apologize for the analogy. But nonetheless, the idea is still there. So we try to avoid spreading our teams too thin. We try to keep our teams more narrowly focused to make sure they're successful. Again, the size of the team doesn't matter, but when you begin to think about, do you have a resource that's both trying to do strategy and trying to build systems? That's a really challenging thing to do for that one individual resource to do both those things. So I'd be very thoughtful around when you think of developing your strategy and ops, that you're purposeful in how you think about what you want those individuals to do. And often dividing up responsibilities is the right path forward, which also aligns with skill sets. That doesn't mean they need to sit in different teams. Again, we've gotten to a scale where we do have different teams, but dividing up responsibilities is the key takeaway. Which gets into my slide here, how we kind of pulled things apart a little bit and said, let's divide those into two different teams. So the next question is, when do you make that decision? What's the right time to begin to split apart ops and strategy into two fully different teams? You can have two different individuals, but when do you actually really begin to think about different teams? So for us, when we sat down and thought through this, it was when we got into different go-to-market models, when we began to see a lot of centralized decisions flowing through sales ops, and we ultimately actually began to find we had misaligned vectors. So what we did was we had just too much going through, again, the peanut butter effect, too much going through sales ops. So we wanted to regionalize and segmentize our decision-making. So we have small business, mid-market, corporate, we have our partner channel. These are all different segments that we think about in HubSpot. And we also sell globally around the world. And when we go to market in Israel, is very different than how we think about go-to-market in the US versus Japan versus, say, India. So we want to regionalize some of the decision-making, making sure our go-to-market fits properly. We want to make sure when we sell into small business versus corporate, we're making the right decisions. And that's where strategy fits in. So it was this idea, we had different go-to-market models. We had too much decision-making going through sales ops, and we need to centralize that or decentralize that a little bit more. And as I talk about it through HubSpot lens, we're of a decent size, but again, this fits when you think about just selling within one region. And if you begin to think about how do you think of your partner channel, if you have one, versus your direct engine, how do you think about maybe the retail or downstream, the smaller price point versus your more upstream price point. Begin to be thoughtful around who do you want to be helping drive that strategy, and is that one person or is that multiple people maybe? So as I already talked through this a little bit, but as we said, we've got our segment specific and in-year strategy is really where strategy plays, whereas operations is a lot more around the rules and the operating systems. I think the key here, those are the measures of success. They are very similar functions. So the strategy team is measured off of the segment maybe that they're supporting, the region or segment, and the drive for increasing customer facing time. Whereas operations also, we have to make sure the operations team is aligning with our financial guardrails, but they're also driving for increasing customer facing time. Those two metrics are really the core metrics that align the teams. We're trying to increase our customer facing time, which ultimately leads to an increase in rep productivity. And rep productivity is just a driver of our overall growth. So we try to back into rep productivity using this measure of customer facing time as a key driver of success. All right, so now we understand we've got ops, we've got strategy. There's some ways to think about how to bring those teams together, but also maybe pull apart the functions a little bit so that we've got clear swim lanes, guardrails. The next thing is change management. So change management is something that's constant. As you grow, you're always changing. And the analogy I love to use for this is it's kind of driving a boat, I think. And I'm not a big boater, so I'm going to get my terminology wrong here probably. But when you're driving a kayak, I have a kayak, so I can handle that. I can move my kayak around really easily. It's just me in the kayak. I don't need to worry about much else. I can spin this thing around all over the place. If I were to try to drive, let's say, a big cruise ship, it would be really hard to turn that thing in any direction. And it just takes a lot more effort. It takes a lot more time to do so. That's what change management is all about. As you think about the scale of your business, there's change that's constant, but it's easier to manage that change when you're really small. As you begin to grow and as you go from one person to 2 to 10 to 30 to 50 to 100, change management becomes more and more important. And for that matter, it becomes harder and harder. So the earlier you can build a change management framework, the better you'll be as you continue to grow and evolve, and the more nimble you'll be as a business as you try to roll out change. So there's a lot of different types of change, and I'll put them into a 2x2. I love 2x2s. I do a lot of things in a 2x2, so we'll take a look at our first 2x2 here. So I think on the 2x2, our X and Y axis is really the personal meaning impact and the personal behavior impact. So it's kind of who am I and what do I do? The first level of change is informational change. This is simple. This is just an update. It's not really changing who I am. It doesn't change what I do that much either. It's kind of just a quick, simple update on something. Informational change isn't that hard to handle. This is a new product launch, let's say. Great, exciting, I get it. It's a little bit of change, what I'm selling, but it's not a change that's going to significantly impact me. The next layer of change is transitional change. And transitional change gets a little harder. This doesn't change what I do, but it changed my personal meaning. So maybe that product launch now is a big change in terms of direction of the product. Okay, this is transitional now. Now I'm selling something different. And that's going to be more meaningful for me. That becomes a transitional change. The next change is behavioral change. Well, now this is even more challenging because now this is what I do changes. However, when you think of behavioral change, that doesn't mean that my meaning changes. So the behavioral change you can see here in the bottom right, because the who I am doesn't change. So this is just a behavior change. The product, let's go back to my example here, my analogy. Maybe there's no product change actually. I'm just asking you to sell it a different way. I'm giving you a different compensation plan. That's a behavioral change. The last one's transformational, and this is the hardest one. And this is really where you're driving a significant change that is both personal behavior change and personal meaning change. We're asking you to change what you're doing, and we're asking you to change who you are and kind of how you do it. So when you think of change, think of them through this lens, because you're going to want to tackle change in different ways depending on the type of change. And again, that upper right transformational change is definitely the most challenging one. So let's take a look at how we think about these things. And as you can see, we've broken them down into kind of levels of impact, and level 4 being transformational, as I just talked through, being the most challenging. And of course, the time and energy required to manage that change is also going to be the most challenging as well. So biggest impact, but also biggest challenge. When we go through change, there's a typical change curve that happens. And a normal person's kind of operating in a certain way. and all of a sudden change happens, and there's a negative dip. And the negative dip is, this is going to be hard. And again, that dip will vary in depth depending on the level of change, level 1, 2, 3, or 4. So after you get through that dip, then you get into the new beginning. And the new beginning typically is going to put you at a better scale than where you were before. That's the purpose of a change, is to improve in some capacity. But that negative dip could take a while. It could be a short window, it could be a long window, it could be a deep window, but it is a challenging spot to be in that negative dip. And what we want to do as we look at this change is we want to standardize this. We want to kind of reduce the friction that happens with change and give people the opportunity to accept that change and move through that change without going too deep into that negative dip. So that's why I kind of have my trend line here to help us think through. That's really the path we'd ideally want to go across on change. We want to flatten that curve. To help flatten the curve, we've got an approach. I've got an approach that we lean into at HubSpot. And this is really, I call it kind of our 4 pillars of change. So the first pillar of the change is the why. We really need to personalize the why. Simon Sinek, I'm sure a lot of you know him. Starting with the Why is a great book by him. It's really spot on, though. We need to start with the why and personalize that why. And it's not just the why overall; it's the why for you. That personalized is a really key component of this. So you need to make sure you start with that personalization of the why. Then understand the losses, understand the fears, understand what the challenges are at a personal level for this individual as they're going through that change, and talk about those, be open about those. Don't ignore those losses and fears. From there, we get into, oops, I clicked on both. We get into supporting the change behavior. So now how are we going to help you to be more successful as an individual, you and your role? So we talked about the why, we talked about the losses. Here's what we're going to do to help you be more successful in this change. And then of course, we're leading into who's going to champion it. You want to have the champion. So as you laid out how you're going to support it, find those champions, and those champions will help pull everyone else through the curve. And they're kind of really the final key. And you want to identify those as early as possible, but really make sure you have some champions to help drive that change forward. So that's how we think about change. That's helped us a lot to flatten the curve as we've gone through various changes. All right. By the way, we're kind of at a good pausing point here. I've got a lot of ideas and topics that we're covering. So we'll definitely get into questions at the end. We didn't lay this out in the beginning. Keep track of them. I'm not going to address them one off as we go, but I think as we get to the end here, we've got some time for Q&A. So you're more than welcome. If you have them top of mind, you can put them into the Q&A now. We'll read through them later on, or you can put them in later. Either way, I will get to them. It's just a matter of timing. Next topic, strategy and alignment. So alignment is a really key concept we talk a lot about at HubSpot. And the first thing is, when we think of alignment, it's really company-wide alignment. So for us to achieve our overall company goals, we have to have company alignment. We have to make sure our product, our pricing, our positioning, and our go-to-market motion are all cleanly aligned. And by doing that, of course, we'll have optimal impact. So ops teams help facilitate this alignment. Our traditional ops functions often sit at the outside. We think of, and I'd love to look at things through a flywheel lens, as we do often at HubSpot. So we've got service ops, marketing ops, and sales ops, and they sit kind of at the periphery. They're tied in with those functional groups, which is fine. But really what we want to do is bring ops to the center, get closer to the customer. And by getting closer to the customer, an ops team can drive alignment around the customer. So the visual for that is this. It's really bringing ops down into the center, thinking of it more as a RevOps function, less as a functional ops team, but more of a combined revenue operations team, and bringing them closer into the customer. There's, I won't get into the full tactics around this, but there's several ways to do that. Voice of the customer, I highly recommend, is one way, where you have in ops a team that's actually the voice of the customer and helps facilitate customer dialogue. Voice of the prospect is another concept that fits nicely into voice of the customer. So, but RevOps teams, the closer you can get them to the customer, the better they'll understand the problems and the better that they can help facilitate that alignment. Going back to misalignment though, and misalignment really leads to this suboptimal impact. So we talked about the idea of alignment being optimal. Of course, when you're not aligned, it's not going to work that well, because you got people pulling in all different directions, teams pushing in all different directions, and we're not really all rowing in the same direction in our boat. So once we can get that alignment, get everyone rowing in the same direction, you can maximize impact. There's a great Dharmesh HubSpot talk on alignment. I bet if you Google it, you can find it in one of his keynotes at Inbound. And he talks about this idea of just even turning this into a calculation. If you could calculate if one person were misaligned, what would that mean to the impact on your business versus having everyone aligned? And it really, for me, being a little analytical, it really hit home with me is the more alignment you can get, actually the faster you can move as a business. This was something he had gotten from Elon Musk, actually, and something that Elon Musk leans heavily into is alignment across his businesses. So culture ultimately eats strategy for breakfast. Great Peter Drucker quote. What we love to say, though, is alignment eats strategy for lunch. And as we can get alignment nailed, we can really drive our strategy forward. And strategy moves a lot faster once we can get all of our teams fully aligned. So we really focus a lot on this idea of vector alignment and ensuring that we've got everyone on the same page. So the next topic here is data strategy. Now, RevOps as a whole, ops in general, the foundation of ops is data. And really at the start of the data layer, everything can build upon the data. At HubSpot, we kind of think about our data mission as a successful mission translates business need to infrastructure, process, and transformation to generate powerful strategic insights. So again, the data has to lead to the strategic insights. As you can see, it's that foundational concept. Our data, our business needs is really our go-to-market plays, how we think about developing our strategy. Our infrastructure is where the data comes from. Our process is alignment and governance. And then ultimately transformation is really the mechanism that leads into our strategic plan. So when we think about our data plan, we have kind of three components to it, or three pillars. There's process and alignment, there's data governance, and then there's architecture. And for everyone, I'm not going to give you the answer for your business, but I think these are the concepts you can apply and then figure out how you want to leverage these concepts. Oops, sorry, I'm a little quick there. All right, there we go. So aligning process and sources is the first thing. So this sounds simple, but one of the challenges we had at HubSpot early on was we had sales ops, marketing ops, and success ops pulling from different data sources. They were leveraging often different even BI tools, leveraging different databases, and running reporting that didn't match up. And you can imagine if marketing says, oh yeah, we have a QL volume that equates to 150% of our plan, and sales ops says, oh no, you don't, you have 75% of your plan, and you got some misalignment there, and then no one really trusts how effective you're being because you're not pulling the same data. You don't have alignment on how to get access to that data. And often that starts actually at the database, the system of record, making sure everyone's pulling data from the same database and the same system of record, leveraging the same tools and how you do it. And then of course, kind of doing it in the same or a similar fashion. So there's not confusion over what's this, the accuracy of the data, where the data is coming from. So this kind of simple view is actually something I find a lot of companies struggle with is ops teams or individuals even are pulling data from different sources, and it really can lead to a lot of distrust of the data, distrust of the strategy that's been developed, because again, that strategy was built on top of this infrastructure of data. Data governance is the next one. So you can have all the data in the same spot, but if you have crappy data, you can't really leverage that data effectively. So data governance is really important. And documentation around how your data should be structured, testing of that data, committees to kind of evaluate what are the key metrics and test them out. And then of course, ownership, making sure you've got some ownership over who's managing that data set and the data structure. This again is once again a fundamental component to a successful data strategy. Lastly, here is development for scale and speed. So one of the things we think about here is how do we leverage the right data across the business? So we lean into product data, we overlap that with a bunch of go-to-market data, building out our own database environment on top of built on the product data, and then that feeds into reporting. So we do leverage our own product data a lot and try to be really in sync across the business and how we think about data. Everyone's business is a little different, but I would recommend don't think about it through just the go-to-market lens. Think about it across the business as a whole. How do you ensure you've got alignment on your product? and align it on your data. The last element here is KPIs, and KPIs really brings all this together. So your key performance metrics. So when I think of key performance and I think of our KPIs, I actually put them into two buckets: our strategic metrics and our run the business metrics. And the strategic metrics are how do we align on what our strategy is, how do we measure the success of that strategy on an ongoing basis. Run the business is stuff. What should we look at every week, every day, every month to make sure we're running the business the right way? Of course, these two things need to overlap, but there are some differences. The first thing is when I think about strategic KPIs, I need to actually have a strategy. I won't go into this. There's a whole separate talk track. We spent a whole hour on this. This is the 30-second top line of it. To get to your strategy, we start with what's our winning aspiration. We build on that based on where we're going to play, how we're going to win, what capabilities we need, and the management systems. So all of that combines with our strategy. The strategy is then fed through what we call our compass stories. And this is a handful of stories. I kept them, didn't list them all out actually, of course, changed a few names here on our DRIs, but the idea is we keep track of all the stories and we keep track of how we're doing against these stories. We've got goals and timelines against them, and we want to see how we're tracking. So this is a strategic view on what are the different plays we're running and how we're doing against those overall strategies. And these roll up to our overall strategy. To make these strategies work though, we need to run the business metrics. So, but I don't want to overlook this strategic concept because it's a really important one. Every year we go through a process of defining what's our strategy, defining what are the compass plays, compass stories, which is what we're looking at here, that are going to align to that strategy. And then the last step is how we're going to run the business. What are the smaller metrics we're going to look at that lead into these different plays? So the run the business metrics, the way that we've put these together is really based on three different levels. We have our vital signs, our pulse metrics, and our diagnostic metrics. And we look at all of these. We spend a lot more time starting at the vital signs. They're really core to the business. How do we think about our revenue, our customers, and HubSpot as a whole? That's how we define our vital signs. Then when we get into our pulse metrics, or level 2, we align those with the idea of attract, engage, and delight. And that brings sales, marketing, sales, and success all together. Attract being marketing, sales implying engage, and delight implying customer success. But looking at them holistically is really valuable to us, especially at that level 1 area. We don't even break them apart on the vital signs. These are all kind of combined view, and then we break them apart as we get into level 2 and level 3. And the way that we define these metrics, we started with questions. What are the questions that we want to answer? And we listed out a whole series of questions, and then we turn those questions into metrics. And you can see we have a fair amount of them. We don't spend a lot of time at the level 3 until something's broken. If something's broken at level 2, that's when we go to level 3. But on a regular basis, we're trying to avoid going to level 3 unless if we see a challenge within level 2 or even in level 1. So this is core to us. This also brings sales success and marketing closer together through the idea of KPIs and metrics that help us run the business. I think that's all I got. So yeah, so that was a bunch of stuff I just threw at everyone. And Rose, I'll pass it back to you for a moment here.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I have one question regarding your presentation. So you talked a little bit about the management change, and I was wondering how it's affecting the ops and strategy team.
Yeah, so ops and strategy, we drive a lot of the change. So when we work with leadership across the business on aligning on a new plan or an updated strategy, or the compass plays that we just talked about, those compass plays are strategic changes usually. And there are bigger changes or smaller changes, but they do have a change element to each one of them. And that change element means we need to both manage the success of the play, but we also, in order to manage the success of that play, we need to make sure that the individual contributors who are involved understand the why and can be brought along through that change and be comfortable with the change. So that's where we play a big role in making sure we actually change or manage change effectively, because it leads to success of the strategic plays.
Okay, so I'll be sharing now the list of the questions that we got from the audience. So both questions we got from the audience, and also some common issues we've seen in startups and tech companies in Israel. So first question is, okay, So a RevOps manager in a cybersecurity company asks, how do you align marketing teams to sales teams in HubSpot, marketing ops and sales ops? How do they align to each other?
Yeah, so we've got one centralized RevOps function. Within that, we do have our various ops teams. So we think of it as RevOps. Nonetheless, there is sales ops, there is customer success ops, and there is servicing ops, all within one overarching function. And by having all those teams together, we can work much more closely together. We have regular meetings together. We're aligned on the metrics. We're aligned on the data we're pulling. So that's one starting point, is making sure our ops teams are actually very nicely aligned. The other piece to this, though, is the actual functional marketing and sales teams. How do we ensure we're aligned there? And once again, we as a business have aligned everyone around this. We call it our flywheel, but it's really the overall go-to-market. We have one leader that sits across sales, marketing, and success, and that leader has all those teams sitting underneath them. So when we look at things like our KPIs, we go through that together. We don't think of it as what's the sales metrics and do a sales readout and then separately do a customer success readout. We have one meeting that reviews our KPIs for the business. We have our CFO there, our chief customer officer there, sales leaders, marketing leaders, success leaders in that meeting, and we talk through it all holistically. That's helped us a lot to ensure we've got nice alignment, and we're all driving towards one overarching goal, which is improving our net ARR. And net ARR is kind of our core North Star metric.
Cool. I heard about like marketing meetings in the past, like sales and marketing.
Yeah.
This is
we also have, you're right, Rose. We also have a smarketing meeting. With COVID, we've had to switch around how that's worked, but we used to get everyone together and as much as possible, at least either in a room and or on video, and we'd have a sales and marketing team meeting, and we called it smarketing, and we'd run it once a month, and that was a great meeting. I love that meeting.
Cool. Okay. So a sales operations specialist in TikTok asks, how did you manage to learn the business and strategic side of RevOps, and how did you start?
Yeah, so I'll give you the short version. I could go on a little ways. I'm feeling old these days. I've been around too long. But I did start as in sales, and really even before that, I started in consulting. I did financial and management consulting, and I got into sales really through a pre-sales track. So I did pre-sales for a short period of time that led into leading a team of what we call account managers. And then that led into me selling. And I stumbled into selling because I actually, in pre-sales, you're kind of doing a lot of demos. That's really was my task, was to go out and do some demos with folks. And I was pretty good at it because I asked a lot of questions. And I just try to get to the bottom of what I'm going to demo, because I don't want to spend an hour and a half demoing a whole bunch of stuff you don't care about. So I'd start asking a lot of questions. I was essentially doing discovery. Little did I know, I was just trying to save some time. But I got good at discovery, and a good discovery really leads to a good sales process. So I kind of figured that out a little bit by chance. And as I figured that out, I realized I really liked selling because I liked asking a lot of good questions. So fast forward a bit, I was in sales leadership, and I ran a bunch of our sales teams at a company several years ago. Then I was asked to move into sales ops. And the reason I was asked to move into sales ops, I had a very just structured mindset, I would say. So that transition from sales to sales ops, I think there's two elements to it. One is analytical mindset, and the other one is structured mindset. So I think those are two key things that allow someone to make that sort of a transition. And I think that's what I've just always been very structured. I think of sales process in a very structured way. I think of managing and developing my team in a very structured way. And I've just been analytical through my background and through the companies that I've worked at. So I think that's helped me to move into the ops world. The question here around the strategic side, I think being in sales has helped me a lot to understand the strategy of growing a business. So I do think that sales experience goes a long way in understanding strategy, actually, because you got a really nice hands-on feel for kind of what works and what doesn't. And I continue to stay very close to the sales org as much as possible, because the sales org is that they've got really great feelers out for the prospects, the market, the industries, and what works and what doesn't. So I continue to run monthly meetings with sales reps, with sales managers, to stay as close as possible to what's actually happening on the floor.
Okay. Next question. CEO in a sales consulting firm in Switzerland asks, when's the right time for a startup to initiate RevOps? When it's do-it-yourself vs. hire?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I think I can give a visual on this.
Okay.
So,
would you like to share your screen?
no, I just tried to do it on yours. I don't know if you can see. Now is my answer.
Okay, cool.
So the reason I say now is I don't think it's ever too early to hire for ops. And yes, if you're a single person running a company on your own, is the first hire you make an ops person? I don't know, maybe, but it could be depending on your business. Ops is so important, I think, to the growth of the business. If you're trying to grow your business, I do think ops is a key driver of it. And when I think of ops, it's not the Salesforce administrator, and apologies to anyone who has that title on the call here, but it's not that Salesforce administrator role that you need out of the gate. That was 5-10 years ago when people said sales ops, it was Salesforce administrator, Salesforce DBA that you might want. Ops is really much more of a strategic role. And that's why I talk a lot about strategy versus ops, even just to clarify. Ops can be a little bit of both, but that first hire I would make is more of a strategic hire, someone who can help take a look at the data, give clarity on what's working, what's not working, and help recommend how to grow your business. And yes, they'll have to play a bunch of different hats as well. They'll have to probably be a little bit of an administrator for the CRM, but mostly I think their goal is around how do I grow the business better and faster. And that's why I think now is the time. It's not too early. When you have a sales leader, you need an ops or strategy person sitting next to them for sure.
Yes, and I totally agree with the Salesforce administrator. I think it was like 10 years ago, much more. And now companies are much more realizing why they should hire a sales ops or RevOps in their company. Okay, so next question. Okay, so what is the difference actually between revenue operations and sales operations? And which one of them we should hire first to establish the sales process? What do you think?
Yeah, and so we touched on this a little bit. I didn't get into too much detail, but really sales ops and RevOps overlap significantly. Within sales ops is a subcomponent of RevOps, just to be very clear, but sales ops is also the biggest subcomponent. So when you think about how to build up your revenue operations function, I would start with someone who's focused on sales. And over time, revenue operations will expand into marketing, into customer success, all those pieces. But so again, RevOps is kind of at the outside, sales ops is slightly within it. But sales ops is I think one of the core component of RevOps. That said, when you build out a RevOps function, you don't want to forget about marketing ops and customer success ops. Those are really, really important pieces to RevOps as well. And you want to understand what's happening across that lead flow, across that kind of traditional funnel view. You want to understand how your customers are retaining and staying around and what you can do to drive better retention. Again, really critical. So I would recommend leading with sales ops, but definitely expand around that as you grow.
Okay, great. So we have like 2 questions regarding reports and mass and data integrity. So I'll just like read 2 of them and then we will answer. So common issues that we've seen in startups having time after time. We have a lot of mess in our CRM. We don't manage to pull the correct reports, how we should treat that problem to create reports for the management and be more data driven. And the second one of data integrity, in an Israeli startup, 5 salespeople would have 7 different ways of working. From your experience, what thinking models have you used to align those overachievers to work with a CRM in a united fashion?
Yeah, and thanks for bringing these together because I think there's overlap between them. Data is the core, as we talked about before. Data is the foundation to a good operation. It's a good overall go-to-market engine. And so I always start there. I think of how do you make sure we have clean data and the right data and are accessing the right data, and thus we can lead into our strategy, our plays, our process, and so on. So the first thing is actually data integrity. And getting to data integrity is a mix of making sure you have the system to capture that data and you have a process to capture that data effectively. And then you're also leveraging and managing data most effectively. So data comes from a couple sources. Data can be input directly into a CRM from your reps. Data can come from third-party sources. We leverage data, for example, at HubSpot from some third-party sources. And then data can come internally from your other systems. That could be from maybe your financial systems, or your kind of people tracking systems, or even your product systems. So you have data coming from a lot of places, and you want to bring all that data together. Data that's coming from another tool or system is usually a little bit more straightforward than manual entry data, because manual entry data has a tendency to have some errors, some inaccuracies probably in it. But you do want to bring it together in a unified way. So again, if you have data coming from the product, data coming from finance, data coming from the people ops system, bringing that together in a unified way can be a little tricky. So, but I would start there. The manual entry, that's what I think this question gets at a little more, is the manual entry piece. It's definitely important to have a process in place around how you can kind of capture the right points of data. Be careful not to ask for too much. It can be very painful for the sales rep to have to enter too much information, or the customer success rep. Rely on your systems as much as possible for data capture. For example, understanding when an email gets sent. If your reps are leveraging a CRM tool to send that email, then great, it automatically tracks. Versus if they're sending that email outside of that CRM in their own email system, then they have to manually load that if there's some systematic way. So the more you can systematize the data capture, the better off you are. There are going to be certain things that are going to be harder to systematize. Even phone calls, by the way, you can systematize. But we put in certain gates with our sales team for data capture. One of those, for example, we want to know who we're competing with. And we can't really capture this very easily in an automated way. We need the rep to enter this information. So for the rep to move their deal from a certain stage to another, they need to enter the competitor. The reason that's important is because once they get past the demo stage, they have to have the competitor in there for them to move past the demo stage and thus issue a quote on the deal. So there's a little bit of I like to think of it as a carrot and a stick here. They have to enter that competitor data so that we can see it move, and thus they can issue the quote and get the customer to buy. So there are certain things. We try to limit those gates though, and keep them very simple for the reps, because we don't want to ask too much, and we try to automate as much as we can. Once we have quality data and we feel comfortable with that data, and you begin to capture enough of that data, then you can move towards a process. And again, that's the other point I think this question is getting at, is you got these 5 reps working 7 different ways. That's because they don't have a clear process. They're all kind of trying all different things out. And experimentation is good, but doing it in a structured way is really important. And I talk a lot about always be experimenting with my team, but we do that in a very structured way, how we experiment. So we might want one sales rep to try something different because we have a hypothesis that this might work better. So we'll work with them and we'll test that out. We want everyone else to kind of work in the same way. And that process is something we've developed over the data. We'll say, we see here for these reps are most successful by doing this first and then doing this and then doing this. Let's all do it that way. And so we kind of roll that out. We've got alignment across leadership to ensure that process works. So that's a little how we've found it to work.
That's great. I would be happy to add something from our end. So we noticed that like a lot of Israeli startups used to do an import to the system. Like mostly if we work with HubSpot, so they do an import to HubSpot, and then they just like mess up with the data. So we just like found a way to create them at some kind of a template. Each company, it's a different template for them to use, with like different fields, different type of fields. Of course, some of them have like the options, some of them are free text fields, and etc. And this is how they use to import the data, instead of just like messing up everything and just like everyone comes and just do an import and doing something else, or working in another way. So this is also one common practice we've been working on. And yes, manual data is the most complicated one to manage. Agree.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd be happy to leave the time for the questions from the audience. So we have like one last questions. I think, let me check. Okay, let's take this question. You've been part of taking startups from $1 million to $1 billion in sales and company value. What are some of the less obvious learnings around scaling sales, marketing, customer success team that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I'd say one of them that I've been reflecting a lot on recently is this idea, you need to anticipate what's going to happen. You need to build a plan over that anticipation. And that's one of the hardest things in ops, I think, is if you're growing at a certain scale and a certain pace, you can't be building and doing things for what's happening today. You need to be building and doing things for what's going to happen 12 months from today. And often people forget about that. Often people are solving for the immediacy of what's happening today. And this goes back to that idea of hindsight, insight, and foresight. Foresight is one of the most challenging things, but it's really, really critical. And if you don't have that foresight, you're not going to be able to grow and scale. So that's probably one of my biggest takeaways, is really leaning into foresight and building your plan, thinking around foresight. I'll try to give a couple. That's one. Another one is hiring. And hiring is one of these extremely critical things for scale. And it sounds simple, like, yeah, we'll just hire more people. Hiring can get really tricky. And especially as you get to a certain scale, you need to think about your systems, your process around hiring. What happens if you don't hire the right amount of people? How do you ensure you're hiring the right people? How do you maybe anticipate how many people are going to leave versus how many you need to hire? So ensuring you've got some operational bandwidth around hiring, I think, is also a really critical component to success. And then I'd say the last, I'll give three because I love doing things in threes. The last one is, we talked a bit about this, is data though. Don't overlook the importance of good quality data. You know, we continue to try to improve and build upon our data that we have. And again, leveraging data, that's having everyone leverage the same database and the same systems is tricky and hard to do. So that's probably my third one, is just really leaning into using a unified data structure is critical.
Okay, great. Okay, Nina, I think the stage is yours if you would like to read.
Yes, amazing. Channing, that was really great. And Rose, thank you for that. And we've got some questions in the Q&A. And of course, feel free, anyone from the audience, to keep sticking in more questions from there. We're going to start with another question for Channing. How would you recommend the best pathway to getting a job in RevOps? What degree or experience would be best suited for this kind of role?
Yeah, so again, I've heard this one a lot. I would say I have hired salespeople who is my team. Those sales folks don't have necessarily a strong background. They've been very successful though. There's multiple points of entry into ops. Some of those are more junior level entry points where we have a case queue team. They're helping solve for customer inquiries. I love someone who's been in a BDR type role, or even in a quota carrying type role, putting them into that case queue function, solve. In that case queue role, they learn how to become more of an operational person. They turn into a little bit more structured thinker, and usually have to have a little bit of that mindset. Of course, they want to take that on. That's more entry level. If you want to come in a little bit higher above that, again, I've brought people in as a sales rep who wants to get into a strategy role, and they had to have, again, that right mindset. I think that's a really important thing. You have to have an analytical mindset and be a structured thinker. And if you can bring those two things to the table, then I think that helps a lot. The things in addition to that would help is any sort of data experience. You can go take a SQL class, for example. That goes a long way in understanding data. SQL is a great way, again, from a structure standpoint. There's also a lot of ways you can leverage SQL as a language to pull information and analyze data. You can do some other business classes around just Excel modeling or just kind of financial modeling that also gets into a little bit of how we think about sales ops. We're not doing financial modeling per se, but we are doing kind of some similar modeling. So I think those are a few ideas and ways that hopefully can help.
Thank you. That's great. The next question I'm going to ask from an anonymous attendee is, given that both marketing and sales teams are prospecting on the same accounts, ABM, how would you decide if a prospect should attribute to marketing inbound or sales outbound efforts other than first touch point wins? Rose or Channing, please feel free to take that one.
Yeah, I'll give my quick 2 cents, and Rose, I love your take also. We do lean into first touch. It's just a very simple, easy way to think about it. We focus a lot more on ABM from a net new prospect perspective we focus on this question a lot on the net new side versus ABM. ABM is typically sales driven in some capacity, sales or customer success. We expect them to have a relationship there. So marketing helps drive and accelerate that outreach or that hand raise, if you will. But sales, customer success should no matter what, be a big component of it. Net new, I think, is more challenging. How do you attribute that net new lead? And that we really do lean into first touch. What was that first touch point? Where did it come from for attribution?
Yes, from my point of view, it has to work both inbound and outbound in terms of ABM, because if not, the salespeople are just like spending too much time just like reaching out to cold leads, to cold like doing cold reach outs, doing basically the attracting thing of like prospecting, and eventually like inbound and outbound makes sense in terms of ABM, because then you can just like have the attracting part over the marketing and get the salespeople focus more on sales and engaging. And this is like the from my point of view.
Amazing. Thanks so much. The next question is, it's easy to focus on or measure many KPIs. Any suggestions on which ones to focus on, how to narrow the amount down, and what is the ideal number?
Yeah, so we clearly had a lot when we saw my final KPI dash. There was a bunch of them in there. We can't look at all of those though. It's just too many. So it's something that that's why we think of it as layers. So we peel back the onion, and there's the first layer, and that's is everything working okay? We start there. And then if not, all right, something's broken. Let's go to the second layer. Let's go to the third layer. Third layer, we typically don't get into unless if something is broken. We've tried to keep our first layer to under 10 KPIs. And that's kind of a ballpark. There isn't, I wouldn't say a definitive rule here, but I would avoid a first layer of KPIs of 25. I think that's just too many. I would try really hard. It was very hard for us to get it down to that kind of range of 10 or so. But I would try to keep it tight. And then from there, have a second layer. So each KPI, has multiple drivers to that KPI. And we actually built up a little bit of a model to understand how to think about this. And it looks like that layered approach where you have, these 10 or so at one level and then the next level beyond that. But there's a bunch of KPIs that point to each individual KPI. So that's roughly how I would think about it.
Rose, do you have anything to add?
I actually have a question. Do you measure different KPIs between the teams? So for example, marketing, sales, and customer success, ops, or do you have like mutual KPIs for all revenue team?
Yeah, we do measure. We do have measures that align to the different teams. We look at them collectively together, but they do align to the team. So we can have accountability. For example, we do look closely at our marketing SLA, and we ask marketing to drive a certain amount every month of revenue that's attributable to them. We look at customer success on a customer retention side. We look at revenue retention as a combined number between customer success and sales. So some of the metrics overlap a bit. For example, even our overall pipeline is a combined number between marketing and sales, but the marketing SLA is a marketing specific number. So there are a few that combine, but then there's definitely team specific ones as well.
Great. Definitely answered the question. Thank you. The next question is, and everyone feel free to, if you have any more questions, to put it in the Q&A. We want to get through all the questions that you have. Which tips would you give to one RevOps person in a small startup?
Yeah, so I'll go back to our fundamentals and think about where are you in your journey of building out the team and building the business. I would start with data though. Again, it's foundational. Make sure you've got a good system of record and plan for getting access to data. Everything drives from data. So I'd really just start there and build that foundation. And once you have that foundation in place, you can begin to drive strategy. You begin to have more foresights and insights. But yeah, that would be my one key tip is data. Yeah.
I will add one more thing. We like to see it as like some kind of hierarchy. We call it like the Maslow hierarchy or the scale-ups hierarchy. We always start with the first layer, which is the bottom of data, accurate data that we must have in the CRM. On top of it, like processes, how the sales processes look like from lead to cash. And on top of it comes the reporting and the dashboards and the automation, whatever everyone wants to get in. But basically we need to start from the bottom and work hard on the data part to get into the reporting. So this is how we see the RevOps person acting in a small startup.
Amazing, thank you. And the last question we have here is, what do you mean, Channing, from your slides, what do you mean by getting ops closer to the customer? This relates to, your slides where the customer was in the center, just to give everyone else background.
Yeah. So the more ops can understand the customer challenges and be in tune with the customer, the more impact ops can have. So of course, the visual is really simple. We can say just move the circles in, and now you're closer to the customer. But the reality is we actually want ops to understand what the customers are saying and doing. And customer, by the way, is inclusive of prospect too. So one of the things that we've done is built up this voice of the customer team, and that voice of the customer team helps us to understand what do our customers want, what do they need. Another thing we do is we think of ops, there's really two customers. There's the end customer, but then there's the sales team or the customer success team. That's a bit of our customer too. So the other thing we've done is have ensured that the ops and strategy teams, most specifically, are very close to the sales org and working closely with them. They're part of their meetings. They're part of the team in a sense when they talk about what's going on, what's happening in the business. So the strategy and ops teams can really understand what the reps are hearing and seeing, and again, reps are feeling it from the customer side. So those are two different mechanisms we leaned into to help drive that idea of getting closer to the customer. And again, by being closer to the customer's voice and understanding what the customer wants, the ops teams can help facilitate that, often in a more efficient way than a rep or anyone else can.
I think in this case, the conversation intelligence can help once you're recording and having the transcript and everything. That is like a major change of the last few years, I think.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
Great.
Thank you. Amazing. Does anyone have any last questions they would like to ask? Please feel free. And Rose, would you like to say some last words before we conclude for the evening?
I think we're on time, first of all. And thank you so much, Channing, for coming and just like lecturing and speaking about it. It was super interesting, and we've been so super happy to have you here. Yeah, I think that's all from my side.
Okay.
Cool. My pleasure. Enjoyed it, and thanks for having me. Happy to.
Before we all sign off, I just want to say that if you want to contact anyone from ScaleOps, I'm going to put our contact information in the chat. And also, I want to hear from you, audience. You've heard from Channing and Rose, so please just write one lesson, one takeaway that you have from this evening. You could just write one word in the chat. We would love to hear one thing you've learned, either a tip, either a word of how you feel right now. I could start. Advice and
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Start with data. I like that. Start getting your data collected as well. I'm just going to add in our email addresses before we go. And obviously, excellent, very useful. Thank you. And obviously, you could always find us at scaleups.co, hubspot.com. That's basic. You're welcome, Ron.
Yes, we will send the recording, by the way. No worries about that. And it was also like live on Facebook, so you can find this recording on our Facebook page as well.
Which you could also like and follow for more information about ScaleOps and updates.
Lovely. Thanks, Ariella, Tzvi, and Inbar. Cool.
Okay, so let's wrap up.